in Singapore, we love tests. We start very early and we have tests for almost everything, right? My son, who's 7, he starts his first test in the media, and they have tests every bi-yearly all the way. At 13, they have a national standardized test, so we can understand how much pressure we have on tests. And now, there's also tests in physical education, but we have no idea, right? So it's an international issue because there's this need now to keep on giving some scores somewhere. Of course, it's a bit to increase the profile of physical education around the world. In Singapore, we have a national physical fitness test. We get the kids, right, at age 10 to go through tests that's meant to get them ready for army, to be honest. So they have physical fitness tests, and we dread it every time since we are in primary 4. Now we want to introduce skill tests, so every time you do a module on football, a module on badminton, there'll be tests involved. So it's getting really rigorous here in Singapore. The Singaporeans here can agree, right? Yeah, okay, I see people nodding. So as a teacher for the past 15 years, I see skills tests as something that is boring. Boring for me, and of course boring for the kids, because they're there for lessons, for PE lessons, to learn, and we do tests for them. Of course, I see some reliability issues, because it's performance oriented. We don't see their ability really. We see performance, but do we see learning? Do we see ability? We don't. Of course, I do all the tests, and suddenly everybody in the class gets an A. Wow, because everybody is able to hit the ball into the target, for example, and that's easy. And how do I know who's an A or who's a B? And that's another issue. And because the practice sessions mimic skill tests, some of my teachers focus their lessons on just replicating the test, and that's not right. Maybe we lose the purpose there. And of course, it's common for us to see our learners, even our skilled players, to be stuck in a rut. They reach a plateau where they can't improve anymore. And the question here is, how do we get them out? So that drives me to look into my studies, and again, I introduce you to the dynamical systems theory. And the dynamical systems theory conceptualizes humans as complex human beings, complex systems. And let me just elaborate on this point. We have the capacity to exhibit stability and instability. So what that means is the exploration of movement patterns. Now, the phenomena I'm going to cover for this session is the critical slowing down. It's basically the time taken to recover from a perturbation and return to the steady state. So if I use my example of running, which I used yesterday, if I have someone with one movement pattern running, and I introduce a perturbation, maybe I put a hurdle, and he has to jump over, right? If he's skillful enough, he'll continue running. If he's not skillful enough, he'll probably fall down, take some time, and continue. So his critical slowing down will be different. So some examples of perturbation studies. I've shared the walk to run gait. Of course, there's motor learning involved in terms of skill acquisition. We talk about perturbations in practice to get people out of the rut. Differential learning, training, changing the equipment. All right, these are also forms of perturbation. And there's also mechanical perturbation in some of the studies. In a basketball shot, there was a band that was attached to the hand. So before he shoots, there's this mechanical perturbation, and we wanted to see how this basketball player reacted. So that's an example there. So of course, the research gap in these studies that most of the studies are cyclical, lab-based kind of studies, and the dearth in literature is quite clear. So that's where we come in, because I want to see how these phenomena evolve. So of course, the so what comes in again. As I mentioned yesterday, these phenomena are inherent, so it's really difficult for us to lie this kind of ability, because every one of us will share some inherent characteristics. So for me, it's just not any more scores. I see something beyond that. I see your ability. So when we look at critical slowing down, it will give me a reflection of how skillful you are, how adaptable you are when met with a perturbation. So some hypotheses here, just to keep it quick. The skilled participants, we expect them to be not affected at all. So they'll probably show that same movement pattern all the time. Whereas the less skilled participant will show many, like we've seen yesterday. But most importantly, the skilled participants should get back to their normal levels as quickly as possible, as compared to the novices. So the methodology is similar to what I did yesterday. So we have again 10 skilled participants and 10 novice participants using 3D motion analysis, using 9 MAC cameras at 100 Hz. Now, for this study, it's a bit different from what I presented yesterday. This time I only have 5 locations, and the delivery is no longer one ball at a time. The balls will be delivered sequentially at the one location for about 14 times or 15 times, and within these 15 times I introduce 2 sets of perturbation. So there will be 2 perturbation trials involved to throw this participant off. So that's perturbation, right? So how fast I continue. So 2 perturbations are involved in the top spin. And the top spin will be, as you all know, the idea is to give them that shock. So after each perturbation, we monitor 5 trials. Do they get there in time? So data analysis is as follows. I only look at the upper body. Something that I'll look into in the future will be inclusive of the lower body. So let me run through quickly how I would identify critical slowing down. So these are the number of trials. So in this case, there are 14. So trial 1, trial 2, no perturbation. Then I introduce a perturbation here with the red line. So there are 2 perturbations. Now after a perturbation, how long does it take for him to go? It depends on this average line. So the average of this dissimilarity score. Now the dissimilarity score is an index that I get when I do a cluster analysis. It shows how different one movement pattern is from another. If 2 movement patterns are the same, you get 1. Anything else, you get a different number. So from here we see the score. And in this case, it takes maybe 1 trial to get back to below the pre-perturbation level. So similar for both, 1 each. So quickly, let's get into the results. Performance-wise, it's clear. We know who are the skilled, who are the novices in terms of their mean points. But most interestingly, and this is something to add on if you were sitting in yesterday, there are now 4 movement patterns produced by the skilled participants and 7 by the novices. So for those who sat in yesterday, you may recall that I had maybe 1 or 2 for the skilled and 5. So we see a lot more movement patterns just by this perturbation being involved. So cluster 2, 4 and 5, 1, 3, 6 and 7. So this is right hand and these are forehands. So you could see there. This is the top view and this is the side view. You could see that the red one is a full forehand strike. Interestingly, and I highlighted here, the ones in red actually are the ones produced by the skilled participants. So if you could see, their backhand is really stable. That means there's no much variation in their backhand, it's always the same. But in terms of their forehand, you see 3 different types now because of a perturbation being involved. So the critical slowing down scores as a group, alright, this is what we see. We see that there are clear differences between the 2 groups in terms of total critical slowing down, the number of trials they take. And interestingly, 8 out of the 10 participants who are skilled were not affected by the perturbations at all. So, which makes sense. When the perturbation comes in terms of top spin, they are not affected. They continue to do what they are, and that's what we expected to see. So in expert performances, according to David's, it's reproducible, which is what we see. It's both functional and consistent, and that's what we saw with the backhand. And of course, they are resistant to perturbation, and that's why 8 of them were not affected by perturbation at all. Now, from this perspective, the total critical slowing down could be a good indicator for us to determine some level of skillfulness. And for the novices, we tend to infer that this reflects their lack of familiarity to the task. We know that the skilled participants have no problem with this, and it reflects their intrinsic dynamics, between what they know and the task itself, and this difference allows for this myriad of movement patterns. So during this stage, between the 2 constraints, it differs, and that's why you have this search and assemble process that's going on. And of course, it encourages this variability, large variability to happen, right, for them to explore. So we could say that the perturbation pushes them, right, into this state of rigor. So key contributions from a scientific or dynamical systems perspective, we are adding on to the knowledge there. But of course, we also want to highlight that the critical slowing down is a possible way for us to see the different skill levels. Interestingly, the perturbation also affected the skilled participants. Although it were not perturbed, it shows that it can perturb them. And this gives us an indication again how we could differentiate them. Most importantly, this idea of perturbation has this potential to get people out of the rut. So if I were to do a training session, if it is the same all the time, it will never get them out of this plateau, right? So we know that we need to include perturbations in. So perturbation enhances this idea of learning as an ongoing process. So we know learning is ongoing based on yesterday's findings, but we also know now that if you put in perturbation, it encourages them to even further explore. So practical implications, please, if you can, share with the coaches. Always use the idea of diverse learning scenarios, and this time try to include more perturbations. Right? So I did this in a school. I gave them a card, a very simple card for the teachers to do. They told me tests are boring, so we added this element of perturbation involved, and then they saw some nice results. I mean, you could see some dichotomy there. Now, the idea of putting perturbation simply like this, we want to give them something that's beyond the norm, give them the ability to try new things, see their adaptability, their skillfulness to do things. It looks easy because they are quite good, but most importantly is the ability to try something more creative. And perhaps if we do this at our table tennis level, we could encourage, this kind of backhand. Let's do it, and let's encourage these kind of things, and we could only do this through perturbations in our trainings. So with that, thank you very much. Some acknowledgements to my colleagues, Professor Chow and Dr. Robert Rain from Germany. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. One question, how do you define the change of a pattern? Where is the point where it changed? Which criteria do you have?
Okay, so what we do is we do a three-dimensional analysis of their body. So we have all the kinematics of the clavicle, the elbow, their wrist. So from there, what we do is we do a cluster analysis. Now the cluster analysis is based on, again, some algorithms, but the whole idea is that we are able to differentiate different movement patterns from that itself. That's how I can find a backhand, a forehand, and so on and so forth. The way we do it was according to what the trials they are, that's how we can see. So this is the movement pattern that they did, and how stable it is. Yeah. Yeah, so basically, from the joint kinematics, that's where we derive the differences. Of course, we really need to highlight which are the more important joint kinematics. In this sense, we took the following based on other studies that we did. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Really, really good. I was wondering, as table tennis trainer, I'm always searching for new training exercises to do. So can you give us some examples how we could apply this in practice?
So for perturbations, of course there are many forms. I've shared earlier in other studies how even changing of equipment is technically a perturbation. But for me, I would say that the best perturbation is for us to include more randomized kind of training, rather than, when we do drills, it can get quite boring. Maybe after a few times, you know that yes, we want the automaticity, we want the correct movement pattern, but are we restricting ourselves from exploring further or better movement patterns? Because if you go back and we look at high jump many years ago, there was only one way to jump. Nobody did the Fosbury flop until someone really did it, right? So the idea is, if we don't try and explore different movement patterns, we probably will be stuck in that rut. So my idea is, if we have the opportunity as coaches, as teachers, to take some time to think, how can I actually get them to do something different, right? That would be the best. So again, it is all planning involved, but I think if we have the idea that we want them to train, not to just do that thing on its own, but to explore, that would be the best. So I come from this mindset of non-linear pedagogy, where we explore equipment changes, we explore changes of the court itself, and just by changing dimensions of the play area, changing the equipment, we actually change the whole way people play. So maybe this is some things we could consider doing also.
Okay, I will use my creativity.
I'm pretty sure you'll get it. Yes.